Investment demand is also in play because of that reclassification. Gold not as a commodity, but as a currency. As simple as that may seem, you have to understand that that was the role that gold always played. In 5,000 years of monetary history, gold and silver have been money, not a commodity. It's only in recent times that we've downgraded it to being simply a commodity and upgraded fiat paper currency to be that which is venerated and trusted in. And this is one of the important things to remember when we look at economic policy, when we look at monetary policy, when we look at what our politicians are doing in DC today. If it fails, the consequence is going to be felt in the US dollar, because our money system is nothing more than a confidence game. The dollar has had a fascinating history. Prior to 1860, we experienced a number of hyperinflations as a result of trying to finance wars. We determined that we needed something to back our currency and represent some sort of discipline in our monetary regime. Starting in 1860, moving to 1914, World War I, we had that. We had the golden era where gold backed the U.S. currency.
On December 23rd, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into law.
In 1922, we met at the Conference of Genoa with a number of other central bankers and determined that gold was not the only reserve asset that central banks could or should hold. In fact, pound sterling and US dollars in paper form would suffice. By the time we got to 1933, FDR determined that US citizens should not own gold, but we would still have gold as a part of our system for settling international trade. 1944, we had passed World War I. We were at the end of World War II, and at the Bretton Woods Agreement, every world currency was tied to the US dollar.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference. We discussed our plans for the stabilization of world currencies.
We became the gold standard with gold in the backdrop behind us. That changed in 1971. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window, suspended convertibility, and gold was no longer a part of the dollar regime, and as a result was no longer a part of the world monetary regime either.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
We've entered into a period in time where there are now a number of currencies, in fact, all world currencies, that are fiat in nature. In other words, there's nothing backing them, nothing tangible at all, simply a paper promise to pay. Central banks further suppressed the price of gold during the last 25 years by being net sellers of the metal, liquidating it in favor of financial assets. Today, they're net buyers, a very powerful change in the market, one that's driving the price higher as demand continues to increase. What we see is gold appreciating in foreign currency terms, not just in US dollar terms, which does imply that this is a competitive global currency devaluation, and it's not enough to move out of dollars into Swiss francs. It's not enough to pick any of these other currencies as a currency alternative, because their central banks, their money mandarins, are doing the same things that our central bank is doing. They're destroying the currency one note at a time. Not only was gold and silver in a bear market for that length of time, 25 years in total leading up to 2001, but they were liquidating and helping it go even further. That changed last year. They're net purchasers of gold. So what once was a pressure on the downside is now a competitive pressure on the upside. This context of diminishing supply, increased demand by the man on the street, there's now a competitive purchasing of gold between central banks and their citizenry. It was 2009, actually, for the first time in I think over 100 years, that individual citizens owned more gold than central banks. You've had emerging markets which have added significantly, 10 tons in Bangladesh in September, 200 tons in India, most recently at 1,045 per ounce. Russia added 22.5 tons this last year in June. The Saudi royal family and the government, of course, Saudi Central Bank, counted their ounces and found that they had twice what they previously had counted. Instead of 143 tons, they have 323 tons. And this is the observation. Their motivation at the level of central banks is to diversify dollar reserves into something that is less exposed to a U.S. balance sheet. The U.S. balance sheet says, USA, bankrupt. You know that the U.S. is broke. You know that the U.S. will do what you would do in their place, which is inflate your way out of the problem. Print more money to take that $70 trillion burden and shrink it down to a $35 trillion burden. The Austrian School of Economics holds that the market and market participants like you and I can solve each and every economic problem. Just give us a chance. I'd like to refer you to a quote from Richard Duncan from his book, The Corruption of Capitalism. When American policymakers abandoned the core principles of economic orthodoxy, balanced budgets and sound money in the 1960s and early 70s, capitalism began to evolve into something different, debtism. It was inherently unstable, however, and in 2008, debtism collapsed. Debtism has now been replaced by a different economic paradigm, that of statism. Statism, we can expect to see expand across the world. Ian Bremmer's latest book highlights the point that capitalism and corporate power is diminishing compared to state power and the role of the state in all of our lives. This is an issue. There's never been a period in history where as much faith and trust has been put in the world's central bankers. Since 1971 to the present, we're on an entirely fiat system. What that means is there is nothing backing any currency, not the dollar, not the pound sterling, not the euro, not the yen, nothing. They're all fiat.
Central bankers have always had one thing in mind: self-preservation.